She reached for the oven door, expecting nothing but the dinner rolls she had left warming inside. What looked back at her instead was a face she knew, a face that had died 2 years before this plane ever left the ground. Welcome back to Real Ghost Chatter. I'm Marianne Paul, America's Lady of Supernatural Thrillers, and I'm so glad you're here. Pull up a chair because today we are not stepping into an old house or a quiet cemetery. We are climbing 30,000 feet into the air, into the cabin of a commercial airliner in the 1970s, where pilots, flight attendants, and even an airline vice president came face to face with two men who, by all rights, should not have still been on the job. This is the story of Eastern Airlines Flight 401, and this is the story of the ghosts who never clocked out. On the 29th of December, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 lifted off from John F. Kennedy Airport in New York, bound for Miami. 163 passengers and 13 crew members settled in, most of them thinking of nothing more than getting to Florida in time for the new year. The aircraft was a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, delivered to Eastern only 4 months before. Wide-bodied and modern, it was the kind of plane the airlines loved to show off. But for the men flying it that night, the newness of the aircraft came with a cost. Captain Bob Loft had fewer than 300 hours in the L-1011. Flight engineer Don Repo had barely 50. Even seasoned professionals were still learning this plane's quirks, including an autopilot system more sensitive than anything they had flown before. As the plane came in toward Miami, something small went wrong. A single indicator light, the one meant to confirm the nose gear was down and locked, would not illuminate. It was a minor problem, the kind pilots are trained to handle without breaking a sweat. But it swallowed their attention whole. Loft, Repo, and First Officer Bert Stockstill fixed so hard on that one small bulb that none of them noticed the autopilot had quietly slipped off. The plane sank lower and lower into the dark, and by the time anyone looked up, the swamp below was already rushing toward them. Flight 401 went down in the Florida Everglades. 101 people died that night, Loft and Repo among them. 75 survived, pulled out of black water and sawgrass by rescuers who worked through the night with flashlights in their bare hands, wading through mud that some of them later swore seemed to grab at their boots and pull back. It was a tragedy, plain and simple, born out of something as small as a burned-out bulb. Given time, a story like that usually settles quietly in the history books, remembered mostly in safety manuals and old newspaper clippings. This story did not. In the months after the crash, Eastern needed parts for the L-1011 aircraft still flying in its fleet. Several accounts say that some of the salvageable pieces from the wreck, cabin equipment mostly, were pulled out, repaired, and quietly worked back into service on other planes. This is right around the time people started seeing things. At JFK Airport in 1973, an Eastern Airlines vice president climbed aboard a flight bound for Miami. Heading toward his seat, he spotted a captain in full uniform nearby and, the way you do with a familiar face, stopped to chat. There was nothing strange about that moment at first. Just two colleagues passing a few words before a flight, the kind of small talk that happens 1,000 times a day in every airport in the country. Partway through the conversation, it hit the man exactly who he was talking to, Bob Loft. Then the man, Bob Loft, vanished right in front of him. Badly shaken, the vice president grabbed a crew member and demanded the plane be searched top to bottom before another soul boarded. No one was found. Nobody matching that description had checked in anywhere, and no one by that name appeared on the manifest. Loft turned up again after that more than once. Always in uniform, always recognized a beat too late, and always gone the second someone realized who they were looking at. One crew, arriving to prep a plane that had been locked and emptied only minutes earlier, found him already seated at the flight deck, running through what looked for all the world to see like a routine check. On another flight, a stewardess noticed a captain seated in first class who had not boarded with the passengers and did not appear anywhere on the manifest. She asked him politely what he was doing on her plane. He gave her no answer at all. Uneasy now, she went and fetched her flight captain, and the two of them walked back together. The captain took one look at the silent man and knew him at once. It was Bob Loft. And in front of roughly a dozen witnesses, the man simply ceased to be there. There is even an account of Loft appearing to ground staff, telling them he had already completed the pre-flight checks on an aircraft. The operating pilot, when he heard about it, was so shaken that he canceled the flight entirely. It's hard to imagine, but sure enough, this airline pilot, a man trained to stay calm through engine failures and lightning strikes, looked at what had happened on his aircraft and decided the safest thing to do was not to fly at all. If Loft favored pilots and executives, flight engineer Don Repo turned up for the flight attendants, usually right in the middle of an ordinary shift. On a flight bound for Mexico City, attendant Faye Merriweather opened the galley oven expecting nothing more than a tray of warming rolls. What she found instead was Don Repo's face looking back at her. She did not scream and she did not bolt. She called a coworker over, and then the flight engineer, and the three of them stood in the galley together while the face lingered, as if it were working hard to say something. According to the account, it finally did. The words were a warning: watch out for fire on this airplane. On that aircraft's return leg, an engine failed and had to be shut down before it could catch fire. The crew brought the planes back safely, and more than one of them privately called it a small miracle. Later, when shown a photograph of Repo, Merriweather picked him out without a second's hesitation. Then there's the account of the phantom repairman. A flight attendant walked into the galley before departure and found a flight engineer bent over one of the ovens, tools in hand. Just a little electrical problem, he told her pleasantly. All fixed now. She thought nothing of it until she returned to the cabin and discovered that the flight engineer actually assigned to that aircraft was a different man entirely, and he told her plainly that he had not touched the oven because the oven had not needed fixing. Repo was seen in the cockpit as well, on one occasion warning the operating crew about a faulty electrical circuit. However unsettling the messenger, the message was correct. The circuit was found and it was replaced. Other accounts credited him with pointing crews toward a hydraulic leak and toward a fire hazard, each one confirmed after the fact by the people who went looking. And it was not only the crews. On one occasion, a team of caterers loading a plane between flights came hurrying off the jet and flatly refused to go back aboard. Every one of them told the same story. They had seen a flight engineer standing in the forward galley, and then, in front of all of them, he was gone. Passengers reported strange moments, too. Two different women on two different flights grew worried about pale, unresponsive pilots seated beside them and called for help, only to watch the man vanish before the flight attendant arrived. Both women, shown photographs of the Flight 401 crew afterward, pointed to Don Repo. Crew members across the fleet reported more than 20 separate encounters like these in the years that followed. Most of them clustered around the aircraft carrying the salvaged equipment. The details lined up eerily well. Full uniform, calm and lifelike, never Loft and Repo together on the same flight, as if each man had claimed his own post. And in nearly every account, the sighting came bundled with a warning, a sound worth checking, a system worth testing twice, a disaster caught just in time. Before we go further, let me tell you about something worth curling up with once the lights are back on. My Ravens Cove Iconoclast series follows 6 books of small-town Alaska, spiritual warfare, and the kind of dread that follows you out of the room. Nothing you would need to hide from your grandmother, just stories about darkness meeting a light that is stronger. Find them on Amazon.com or at MariannePaul.com or wherever good books are sold. Now back to the story. As word spread through the airline community, Eastern grew nervous, though less about ghosts than about its reputation. Employees were warned they could lose their jobs for repeating the stories, and crew members who came forward were quietly steered toward the company psychiatrist, a visit that could put a flying career at risk. And then there were the logbooks. Federal regulations require every incident on a flight, however small, to be written down. After one famous sighting delayed a flight for more than an hour while officials searched the plane, a group of curious flight attendants went and pulled the logbook for that aircraft. Every page up to and including the day of the incident was missing. Other planes rumored to be haunted turned up with missing pages too. Eastern's chief executive, Frank Borman, a former astronaut not known for flights of fancy, called the whole thing nonsense, publicly and often. This was a man who had circled the moon and looked back on the Earth with his own eyes. Ghosts on an airplane were not going to rattle him, at least not in front of a reporter. But the airline's own actions told a quieter story. One retired pilot remembered flying alongside a co pilot who moonlighted as a preacher, a man who claimed he had been paid to travel down and bless the aircraft carrying those salvaged parts. Another account tells of a deeply religious flight engineer named Dick Manning who, after two badly shaken stewardesses reported seeing Repo, waited until the plane emptied and then walked the galley, sprinkling holy water and praying for the dead man's rest. He said the temperature in that empty aircraft dropped to near freezing, and then he saw Repo's face appear one last time, then a light, and then nothing at all. And rather than simply laughing the reports off, Eastern went ahead and pulled every salvaged piece of Flight 401 out of its L-1011 fleet. Perfectly good equipment replaced at real cost for no reason the airline ever cared to explain. Meanwhile, the Independent Flight Safety Foundation, an organization with no stake whatsoever in ghost stories, took the reports seriously enough to write them down. Their conclusions was measured but plain. These accounts came from experienced, trustworthy pilots and crew, and the reports themselves were considered significant. That is not the language of people brushing off a campfire tale. That is the language of an organization that could not fully explain what its own best people kept quietly reporting, one after another, for years. Not everyone in this story wanted it told. Captain Loft's widow, Dorothy, along with their two children, took author John Fuller to court after his book made these stories famous. Their complaint was not about accuracy, it was about dignity. They felt Bob Loft had been turned into a ghost story for profit, his name and memory used to sell books and later a television movie without anyone asking the family first. The Lofts lost the case and lost again on appeal. The court decided Bob Loft had become part of a newsworthy event, whether he liked it or not, and that Fuller's book fell under the kind of protection given to matters of public interest. Behind every one of these stories is a family who buried someone they loved, then had to watch the world argue for decades over whether that same person was walking the aisle of an airplane. Whatever you believe about Bob Loft and Don Repo, they were husbands and fathers first. Whatever happened afterward was never the whole of who they were. Now, not everyone connected to this story believes it, and honesty matters more to me than a tidy ending. Author Robert Serling, writing years after Fuller's book made the rounds, interviewed Eastern employees who swear they could not find a single person willing to say, in their own words, that they had seen a ghost. Some traced the whole legend back to an offhand joke pilot who, after landing safely on one engine, laughed to a colleague that for a second he thought Repo's ghost had come along for the ride, meant as nothing more than dark humor between exhausted men. Human memory and fear can do strange things with a story like that, stretching a joke into a legend over months and years without anyone meaning for it to happen. But there are pieces here that do not fold neatly into that explanation. A vice president who had never heard the joke, recognizing a dead man mid sentence, a flight attendant who picked a face out of a photograph without being led to it, a pilot who found a genuine mechanical fault waiting exactly where a vision had pointed him. And whatever was behind it, joke or something else entirely, it stopped the moment Eastern pulled those salvaged parts out of the sky. Here is what stays with me long after the story ends. It is not the crash, and it is not even the sightings. It is what Loft and Repo were doing, if these accounts are true, and all that time after they were gone. They did not haunt the way we usually picture haunting. No aimless wandering, no reliving the worst moments of their lives in a loop. If the stories are true, they came back to finish something, to warn a pilot before disaster found him, keep watch over a plane full of strangers who would never know either of their names. And I think of Dorothy Loft, too, sitting in a courtroom, fighting to keep her husband's memory from becoming a punchline. Grief does not stop just because a story gets famous. Sometimes fame makes the grief lonelier because the version of a person that spreads through the headlines and television movies is never the whole man his family loved. If there is truth in any of it, then maybe what we are looking at is not a haunting at all. Maybe it is something closer to devotion, a love for work and for the people trusted to your care, strong enough to cross whatever line sits between this life and the next. Psalm 91, verse 11 tells us, "For he, which is God, shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all of thy ways." I don't know exactly what walked into those aisles at 30,000 feet back in the 1970s, but I know grief and love do not let go easily. And I know we are watched over more closely than we realize, whether by angels, as the Psalms promises, or by someone we lost who simply never stopped caring for the people in their charge. So, wherever you are listening from, in your car, in your kitchen, or lying awake in the dark, know that you are not traveling alone. Something is watching over the path ahead of you. May God's light go before you and find you, even in the darkest places. Until next time.